Cole Bagley joins us now. Cole Bagley covers the Utah Mammoth for KSLSports.com. His appearance brought to you by Hercules First Federal Credit Union. Growing stronger together. Cole, good morning. Happy playoffs.
Yes, sir. We're all set, right? I mean, Utah's heading down to Vegas to make their playoff debut. So, there's a game tonight, but let's get rolling into the playoffs.
We need dates and times and all that kind of stuff, but yes, we do know the matchup. What is the most important thing in this matchup, the number one thing you're looking at to see with what looks like two pretty evenly matched teams, who advances?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for Utah, this is a series that they can win. I'm not saying that they will win it, but, just based on, how these two teams have matched up through the first, two seasons of the NHL in Utah, it's split, it's 3-3, but Utah has a +8 goal differential. Now, things change in the playoffs, right? Utah is a very inexperienced team, while, Vegas is a very experienced team. However, there's a lot of other factors to consider here. I think that, Utah is very hungry. They're eager to prove themselves. They don't want to be done. They obviously accomplished their goal of getting into the playoffs, but that's just the first step. These guys are anxious to prove themselves, to kind of put the National Hockey League on notice, and I think that they have what it takes if they play their game the right way and on a consistent basis through this first round series. I think they could push Vegas, and there definitely is a world where Utah could advance.
Vegas is an interesting team to try to study, and I've been trying to study them here as it looked like they were going to play and get a little bit more in depth. And it's crazy. They've gone through 3 goaltenders, and then with 8 games to go, you rarely see this. Now, I know maybe it's possibly a little bit more common in hockey. They make a change in coaching, and they haven't lost. I think they won the 7, and then they had a tie. So what do we make of Vegas with the coaching change and the 3 goaltenders, and maybe they're hot now? I'm trying to figure it all out.
Yeah, Vegas is kind of just an unknown situation. I really don't know what to expect from them, just based off all the factors that you talked about. I mean, it's been a weird year, down in Vegas. They added Mitch Marner in the offseason, and I don't think that it had quite gone the way that they were anticipating. They didn't become this juggernaut of the Pacific. They barely, clinched the division. It came down to the last game of the season for them to accomplish that, and they needed a couple games to go their way. And, but like you mentioned, they made a coaching change, which – making a coaching change and then seeing results like this is something that is fairly common in the National Hockey League, but not when you have 8 games left and you're on a trajectory to be a top 3, seed in your division going into the playoffs. That's what kind of took people, off guard a little bit. Is they weren't playing bad. I just don't know that they were playing up to the level of the Vegas Golden Knights, and that's just kind of the style and the brand of that organization. Is it's a gold standard. It's in the name, right? And they expect the very best, and they expect to be competing for Stanley Cups year in and year out. So I think for Utah, they need to take this series very seriously. Obviously Vegas has kind of figured it out over the last 8 games. They have yet to lose under their new head coach. So no, it's definitely going to be a challenge. But like I said before, I like the way that Utah matches up here against the Golden Knights, and I think we're in for a very exciting series.
People love to say, you're playing your best as the playoffs roll around. And it's really true with the Mammoth, who were basically a 500 team until the first of the year. They've won 2/3 of their games since then, and they're winning about 75% of their games over the last 8, here into the playoffs. Why are they winning so much more? What have they figured out, and does it / will it translate to the playoffs?
Yeah, I think that Utah has grown and matured, and I think that's really the reason that they've figured things out over the back half of the season. They're one of the best teams, since coming into the new calendar year, and you listed off how many games they've won and their percentages, and their power play is kind of humming right now. They've figured out how to be really effective. They went from, the worst power play in the National Hockey League to, I think, over the last, since coming back from the Olympic break, I think they're in the top 3 there, and that they were second there for a while. So, for Utah, the reason that they started winning so many games is they matured in a way that they learned how to weather adversity. There were a lot of times where they went down earlier, they were trailing, or maybe a team, came back and, maybe they were up by 2 or 3 goals and suddenly it's a 1-goal game or a tie game. And Utah figured out how to get, kind of get past the finish line, how to put themselves over the top and to win those games. Whereas a year ago as the Utah Hockey Club, they were infamous for blowing, fairly big leads or, losing a lot of 1-goal games. Whereas this year, we saw that towards the beginning of the season. Most of their losses were just 1-goal games. And, as the season went on and they matured and some of these younger guys started to continue to figure it out, like the Gunthers and the Coolies. And, I think when you take a step back, there's so many guys in bigger roles for this team than in their previous destinations or than they've ever played in their career. I mean, Clayton Keller is still learning how to be a captain in the National Hockey League. And Mikhail Sergachev is number one defenseman on the team, and that's not what his role was in Tampa Bay. And Nate Schmidt was more of a depth defenseman in Florida, and he comes here, and now he's one of the anchors of the blue line, and he's got such a role in terms of being a veteran and a veteran leader. And so, just as the year went on, I think everybody just started to kind of thrive and embrace their roles and figure it out. And like I said, the biggest thing that this team has learned is how to weather adversity. And that's going to be a huge deal in the playoffs because, momentum shifts are 10 times bigger, 10 times more intense in the playoffs. If you're a team that wants to make some noise, you got to be able to weather a storm. You have to be able to, defend your own zone for, lengthy, defensive zone possessions where, a team is just smothering you and they're peppering the goalie. You have to be able to, get through that and then go at the other end. Like that's just how playoff hockey is. And, I like that Utah has really started to figure out how to play that way in the regular season. And if they can continue to do that, to me, that is the biggest factor as to whether or not Utah can survive this series and make some noise and potentially win is, can they play a mature game as they've done, over the back half of the season?
Special teams matter so much, and it's highlighted. I think that's what you're getting at as you're talking about the momentum changes and so forth. And you look at the power plays and then the penalty kills. I believe Vegas is in the top 7 or 8 in both in terms of scoring and preventing scoring. Do you think that is an advantage of Vegas, or how do you think that the Mammoth will stack up in that situation?
Yeah, it definitely is. Winning playoff games comes down to just a handful of plays, right? I mean, it comes down to one mistake or one, big success. And, special teams become so critical in the playoffs. That's why Utah's going to need to do their best to avoid taking penalties. And then they're going to need to do their best as well to continue to play well as a special teams unit. What's made the biggest difference for Utah in terms of converting on the power play lately, we had a discussion with Nick Schmaltz the other day after they scored two power play goals on 5 opportunities against the Jets. He said he feels like, they're putting more pucks on net, and rather than playing a perimeter style game, they're getting to the middle of the ice. They're getting in front of the goaltender. They're screening his vision. They're putting, pucks in dangerous places. The defensemen are starting to contribute a little more. If you paid a little bit closer attention to that game against Winnipeg, Mikhail Sergachev had like 7, 8, or 9 shots, and, quite a few of them were on the power play. And that's the reason that Nick Schmaltz actually scored his first goal of the night was on the power play, because Mikhail Sergachev, stepped up. He recognized that there was a lot of traffic in front. He put a well-placed shot on the goaltender, expecting that puck to come back out, and then Nick Schmaltz was able to tap it home. So, yeah, special teams are huge. Obviously, Vegas is a very good special teams unit on both ends of the ice. I think a lot of that just comes down to how experienced that team is, how many veteran leaders they have on that team. So for Utah, again, it's going to come down to maturity. Can they play their game at the highest level? And their power kill, kind of dropped off a little bit over the back half of the season. The power play started to rise, while the power kill started to drop off. But, I think what should give, some confidence to Mammoth fans is the fact that at one point the Mammoth power kill was, I think, 2nd or 3rd in the National Hockey League. So the potential is there to thrive in both scenarios and at both ends of the ice. But it's going to come down to, just how motivated is this team to play their game, as consistently as possible over the course of the 7-game series.
We can sit here and analyze and break it down, but how much of the playoffs really is momentum, a couple of fortunate bounces? your ability, maybe the thing that Andre Tourigny's talking about, and he's been talking about it to get them to this moment, your ability to get a big body in front of the goal and either just shield the goaltender or get a deflection that beats him, and whole series just hang on that kind of stuff, which when you're trying to, tip a puck that's going 100 miles an hour, it seems a little random.
Yeah, I think that the Stanley Cup playoffs probably possess the most palpable momentum in any playoffs in professional sports. And I think the NBA at times can be really close, but just with how hard these guys play, through all 4 rounds, right from the get-go, everything is just so much bigger. Every check, is so much more impactful. Every goal feels, really deflating for the team that lets it in. And, everything that goes on, even, when you boil it down, just winning your battles in the corner, winning faceoffs are huge. And so, for Utah, I think if they really want a good shot to potentially win this series, going back to momentum, I think that winning game 1 is going to be absolutely crucial for this team to get it done. If they want to really push Vegas, the biggest thing and the best thing that they could do would be to go down and into their barn and shock them and shock their fans and steal game 1 to assert themselves in the show. They're not going to be treated lightly, and so just momentum is everything in hockey, but it is just tenfold in the playoffs.
Who do you think has better top end talent?
Like just right now?
Yeah, right now, because sometimes the best players can make the difference.
I'd probably go with Vegas.
Yeah.
I think Eichel is, the best player on that team. And,
right.
He's arguably the second best American player in the game. And I think at times he could even, go toe-to-toe with Austin Matthews as the current best American player in the game. And then to have, a guy like Mitch Marner, a really, really good player for Team Canada, had,
right.
some big games and made an influence at the Olympics. And then, their captain, Stone, he's been there before, right? He knows what it
right.
takes. He led this team to a Stanley Cup, not too long ago. So, if you looked, on paper, I would definitely go with Vegas, but I think that Utah might potentially be the deeper team,
Sure.
just based on, how much talent they have up and down the roster and how well a lot of their depth is playing right now.
We will leave it right there for now. We will inevitably talk to you again during the playoffs as this unfolds. We are looking forward to it. This will be fun. Cole, thanks for coming on the air.
All right. Thanks, Jens. Have a good one.
There's Cole Bagley, KSLSports.com. Follow him. He's got stuff up on YouTube. He's got stuff up on the website. All the hockey you could want. Cole's got it for you on KSL Sports and KSLSports.com. All right, PK, we got to take a break. When we come back, your feedback next. Stay with us.